Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Sigmund. I'm one of the co-founders of Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, and I'll give you a brief introduction to our organization. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. However, I want to be clear that does not mean we are neutral. We are very proudly progressive, and we are part of the indivisible umbrella of groups. So you will see some of that framing throughout our presentation. So Melinda Iyer is also here. She is also one of the co-founders. And I will lead off with an introduction to the judges on our ballot, and then Melinda will take over and go through the propositions. So let me share my screen and we can get started. Maybe get into presentation mode. Okay, there we are. So this is our ballot guide. We are going to cover today only the judges and the propositions, but we do have a full ballot guide, and I will provide the link to that. So all of us have had the experience of opening our ballot and just saying, who on earth are all these judges? They may completely mystify you on the ballot. And here in Maricopa County, we have a very long list every cycle, but I'll explain in a minute how that varies across the state. I've known people, I've felt this way myself, who have stopped dead and just been afraid to turn in their ballot because they don't know what to do with all the judges. We at CEBV identified that gap, and so we created Gavel Watch back in 2020. This is our third cycle. So let me introduce you to Arizona's judicial selection system. How does it work? In the way back of 1974, voters amended the Arizona Constitution to allow merit selection of judges. And this was spearheaded by Sandra Day O'Connor, who was just about to move from the Arizona legislature to the Superior Court bench. So this was a new system of judicial selection and public accountability that's now called the merit system and is used with lots of variations in about 19 states. But Arizona's system is really the gold standard, and we are very, very fortunate. So a constitutional amendment was mounted by the public and passed by voters to establish this system, but it was limited to counties of 250,000 or more in population, or counties that voted to opt in to the system, which Coconino County did back in 2018. So we now have 4 counties in Arizona with Superior Court judges who are both recommended by a bipartisan commission and then held accountable to the public every 4 years for Superior Court judges and every 6 years for appeals and Supreme Court judges. So those 4 counties are Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, and additionally Coconino. Other counties still hold partisan elections. So all over the state, we do get to vote on Supreme Court justices, and depending on the district, we have 2 districts, depending on where you live, you will probably get a chance to vote on one or 2 of the Superior Court judges as well. So the nomination commissions, one for each county and one for the appellate court and Supreme Court, recommend qualified individuals to the governor, who makes the final appointment. It looks like Governor Hobbs will have a Supreme Court appointment soon, since Justice Brutinel has just announced his retirement. So a critical part of the retention system or of the merit system overall is a robust judicial retention system, which is why all the judges are on your ballot. We, the people, get to vote whether to retain or not retain judges on the bench. A later constitutional amendment in the 1990s established a judicial performance review system, which was a new commission that uses objective measures to inform voters about the judges. They evaluate the criteria you see here: legal ability, integrity, communication skills, judicial temperament, administrative skills, and settlement activities. But we at CEBV felt that this was insufficient for a variety of reasons. So here is what the judicial performance review reports look like. And you may not be able to read this on your screen, but the graph on the left-hand side, and I'm using as an example Christopher Corey, who is a judge on the Maricopa County Superior Court. You will see that the top line there gives percentages of superior, very good, and satisfactory. It gives an average of those. For some reason, the JPR Commission omitted including in those averages poor and unacceptable. So that is not the way I do averages, but nonetheless, that is what they do. So many of the judges' evaluations, just looking at the top line, are going to look stellar. However, if you dig down into the details of the reports, you'll not only be able to see how many of these people returned their questionnaires, and we have attorneys, litigants, and witnesses, and jurors. You will see that as few as 7 jurors reported back. The number of surveys returned overall is pretty low. So some responses tallied are even lower at 5 responses or even 1. So it's truly impossible to get a full reading with that few responses. That is just not statistically relevant. If you could see the detail, you would notice that poor and unacceptable rankings for Judge Corey are pretty alarming, and we recommended not retaining Christopher Corey on the Maricopa County bench. But that's not the only reason we recommended not retaining Corey. We wanted to evaluate the bias that judges could bring to the bench. Every judge brings a point of view or a framework for their judicial philosophy to the bench, and governors tend to select judges who are consistent with their own political perspective. So Governor Ducey spent 8 years packing the courts, as well as expanding both the Supreme Court and the appeals courts, so he could pack them some more. And as you know, the ultra-conservative Federalist Society has been guiding both federal and state appointments for a couple of decades, culminating in Trump's appointments, which were handpicked by the Federalist Society and its supporters. So if you look at our full gavel watch, and we will post the link to that, you will see that we give a description and a write-up of the history of the Federalist Society. So what did we do? We used a small team of volunteers to search through all of these different public sources to identify rulings and complaints and courtroom behavior, Federalist Society affiliation, links to any other ideologically biased organizations, postings on social media. We looked at their financial disclosures, and we looked at, LinkedIn and other sites that give personal feedback on judges. We also factored in all the detailed parts of the judicial performance review reports. Frankly, it's research that anyone could do if you have 3 volunteers and 6 months. So here is what our full Gavel Watch document looks like. As you'll see, we have a sort of a thumbnail for easy reference, but we give a lot more detail. So here we have Justices Bullock and King, and we give fairly lengthy descriptions of their backgrounds and all the different information that we researched that we feel leads us to recommend not retaining them. I really recommend that you take a good look to make sure you're comfortable with our recommendations. We do not make recommendations based on any single case. So I also want in our full Gavel Watch to call your attention to the fact that we recommended not retaining a fairly small list of people. However, there were about a dozen more who we said, well, yes, but we have reservations. We give a fair amount of background on that. We also give all the top line judicial performance report scores, but we tell you why we recommend maybe you may want to read that and decide not to retain them. So why do we recommend not retaining Supreme Court Justices Bullock and King? And as I mentioned, it is for a wide range of reasons, not just one court case. Our recommendations are based on just some of the criteria you see there. Remember, Governor Ducey expanded the Supreme Court so he could appoint more ideological partisans, and Clint Bullock was one of those beneficiaries. He has fought for education privatization and defunding of public education, shifting money from public schools to private schools for decades. He has a long history with a multitude of organizations, including the Libertarian Goldwater Institute, the Federalist Society, and the American Legislative Exchange Council, which you'll remember, or you may know, is a bill mill. They write bills and then farm them out all over the country to state legislatures. So besides the 1864 abortion ban, ruling, which you're probably familiar with, Justice Bullock was on the wrong side of another lesser known case called Brush and Nib, and I think it's versus the city of Phoenix. And what that does is the Supreme Court ruled to allow discrimination against LGBTQ individuals. And this was on the part of a person who designed wedding invitations. And we thoroughly disapprove of that sort of prejudice. With regard to Justice King, she is also a member of the Federalist Society. She also, of course, ruled to reinstate the 1864 abortion ban, but also ruled to use the phrase unborn child instead of the medically accurate fetus in the pamphlet that goes out to voters explaining the abortion initiative that's on the ballot. She is also formerly Governor Ducey's Deputy General Counsel. So we know that she was a particularly prized appointee of his. This is what our short graphic looks like. You'll see only the judges here that we recommend not retaining. And you also see all the propositions, almost all of which we recommend a very strong no vote on. 139, of course, is the Abortion Access Act, and we recommend yes. And Melinda will be going into all the details on that. For the first time, we included a second page on our graphic, and this is because we are very concerned about our election infrastructure, and county recorders and boards of supervisors are the front lines of our election infrastructure. So we included candidates who are running against very outspoken MAGA election deniers. It is critically important that we not let them take over our election system. So, lastly, do not vote away your rights. So vote no on Prop 137. This would actually almost eliminate the entire public accountability part of our merit system. In other words, voters shouldn't worry their silly little heads about all these judges. And what this would do is freeze in place our current judiciary. Even more, it would nullify all our judicial votes from the November election this year because it is retroactive. It also politicizes the process by putting two partisan legislators on the Judicial Performance Review Commission and allowing any legislator at any time to force the Judicial Performance Review Commission to investigate any judge that they don't agree with. And the JPR Commission is not an investigative body. Last and most important, we know what an unaccountable judiciary looks like. We have the US Supreme Court with their overturning of decades of precedent on ideological grounds, and also their unbelievable ethics challenges. So we strongly urge you to tell everyone to vote no on Prop 137. So now I am going to turn it over to Melinda to go over the propositions. Thanks so much.
Well, hello, everybody. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Melinda Ayer, and I am one of CEBV's co-founders. And I've been tracking the legislature since 2017, and it is my responsibility to talk to you about the many propositions on your November ballots. There are 13 of them, and all but 2 are legislative referrals. So we're going to start with Proposition 133. And I would note that any proposition that begins with a 1, so all the 100 series propositions, would amend our state constitution, which makes them that much more hard to get rid of, we'll say. So Prop 133 would ask voters to enshrine Arizona's current partisan primary system into the state constitution. So the system that we have where, you end up with, a Republican ballot and a Democratic ballot. And if you're an independent, you have to select one of those to vote. That would be our system forever. So this comes from the most extreme voices in the legislature, and it's designed to ensure that, at least on the Republican side, only the most extreme candidates can survive. And I'll give you the example of Stephen Richer, our Maricopa County recorder, who has broad bipartisan support, but could not make it through a Republican primary and lost his race to an election denier. So Prop 133 will guarantee that this trend continues, because typically in a partisan primary, it is the most extreme voices that turn out. Prop 133 would also block any meaningful reforms like ranked choice or top two primary voting. This is a legislature that loves to tell us what to do. And Prop 133 is more of the same. We do have cities in Arizona who use some of these election strategies. The city of Phoenix, for example, has for a long time. And Prop 133, if it passes, would preempt cities like Phoenix from running their own elections the way that their residents want. I mentioned independent voters. Prop 133 is unfair to independent voters who have to proactively ask for that partisan ballot. Many don't even know they can. And there is a wrinkle with not voting in the primary elections. If voters don't exercise the right to vote often enough to suit our legislature, they get removed from the active early voting list. So that is an additional hurdle for independent voters. And also it does conflict with another proposition on your ballot, which I will get to in a bit. But it was designed to set up an either or scenario with Prop 140. And if both of those should pass, whichever one gets the most votes will become law. But we are recommending a no vote on Prop 133. Our next is Prop 134. This is an attack on Arizona's initiative and referendum process. So our right to direct democracy is in the state constitution. This is a process that legislators have spent the last decade at least actively restricting, and they have gotten to the point where they cannot restrict it any further without amending pieces of it out of our state constitution. So that is what Prop 134 would do. It would force citizen initiatives to collect signatures not just from a percentage of voters, as they currently have to do, but from a percentage in each of Arizona's 30 legislative districts. 10% for initiatives, and 15% for constitutional amendments. This is designed to make it harder and more expensive for us to make our voices heard. So all of a dark money group would have to do is pour a huge amount of resources into someplace small like Safford or Tuba City and get a tiny group of well-funded agitators to harass circulators and discourage citizens from signing, and they would effectively get veto power over the whole rest of the state. The reason why the legislature has put this forward, of course, is that some of these politicians do not want us making our own laws. They don't want us going around them to pass laws they don't like. And it's not just here, it's part of a national push. There are similar measures being pushed forward in Missouri, Ohio, Idaho, largely in response to the same issue of citizens going around extremist state legislatures to pass their own laws. I would also point out that this makes different rules for politicians and for us. The legislature doesn't need a lawmaker from each district to vote out in favor of a bill in order to pass it. They just need a simple majority. And of course, it doesn't apply to the measures they put on the ballot, just ours. And I do want to leave you with a quote from the Brennan Center for Justice, which I will read to you verbatim. State officials' efforts to thwart citizen initiatives do not take shape in isolation. They are part of a larger anti-democracy blueprint. Yet another example of state officials trying to manipulate the rules of elections and obstruct the will of voters. So this is one where we strongly encourage a no vote on Prop 134. All right, moving on to Prop 135. This one is a little bit arcane, so I would ask you to bear with me. It asks us, the voters, to take away the governor's special powers to make an emergency declaration after 30 days. So those powers would only last for 30 days. And then after that, the legislature would have to come back into session and vote to extend those powers. So this may not sound like such a big deal until you realize that it endangers our open state disaster declarations and thus funding for federal crisis. Arizona currently has 41 of those open state disaster declarations. These have to be in place before we can get federal funding. This measure, Prop 135, exempts fires and floods, which make up the vast majority of emergencies, but it doesn't exempt drought. So under Prop 135, this legislature, think about our legislature for a moment, this legislature would have to get together and argue over whether climate change is real before Arizona could get any relief funding for a drought declaration that has been in place since 1999. That endangers public safety. Emergency declarations are meant to ensure that our governor can quickly respond to a crisis. Removing this puts Arizonans in danger. If we're facing a true state of emergency, we cannot wait around for politicians to argue. We need the governor to act. And maybe the worst part of Prop 135 is that it would allow a 1/3 minority of the legislature to call themselves into special session. Right now, they need a 2/3 supermajority vote to do that. And so to put this number in perspective, that 1/3 is roughly the same amount of our current state legislature that's in the election denier camp. Do we really want to let those people call themselves into special session whenever they want? And I would say no. So I am going to urge you to vote no on Prop 135. Okay, Prop 136. You may be sensing a theme here. This one would allow anyone to sue to invalidate a citizen initiative even before it's been placed on the ballot on grounds that it isn't constitutional. So this is another attack on our constitutional right to direct democracy. They cannot currently do this. If the plaintiffs in this lawsuit can get a judge to agree with them, the initiative would be thrown off the ballot, disenfranchising the voters who signed the petitions, no matter how many voters signed the petitions to put that initiative on the ballot. So this would mean that citizens groups would have to fundraise to defend against potential lawsuits and potentially appear in court at the same time as they're trying to collect signatures. It's yet another obstacle in the way of us making our voices heard by passing our own laws. And you want to know a fun fact? Like the other one, this only applies to citizen initiatives, not to legislative referrals. Again, politicians wanting different rules for us and for them. So please vote no on Prop 136. Okay, Prop 137, you already heard Kathy talk about this one. If you've attended a single CEBV happy hour this year, happy hour call, you've heard us rant about this one. We really strongly dislike this measure. It would strip out of the Constitution our current retention process for judges. Judges in Arizona's 4 most populous counties, along with all appellate and Supreme Court justices, would get to serve for basically life until a mandatory retirement age of 70, instead of having to answer to us, the voters, every 4 to 6 years. And everyone here remembers back in April, when our state Supreme Court upheld the 1864 abortion ban. 2 of the justices who voted yes, Clint Bullock and Catherine King, are up for retention this November, and we as voters deserve to have the opportunity to hold them accountable for their decisions. And of course, there are other reasons, as Kathy said, to vote no on those justices. But putting that aside, voters deserve to have the right to hold judges accountable for their actions. But Prop 137 is retroactive. So if voters are fooled into voting for this thing, even if we chose to remove them from office, those votes would be thrown out and they would stay. And as Kathy said, we already know what an unaccountable judiciary looks like. So no on 137. Let's keep judicial accountability. Okay, Prop 138. This one would create a sub-minimum hourly wage for tipped workers. That would bring wages for tipped workers down to $10.76 an hour. Right now they get $11.35 an hour. So obviously that is a decrease in their pay. Obviously that change financially benefits the restaurants and not the workers. This is backed by restaurant industry lobbyists. These are the same folks who also oppose minimum wage and sick leave protections for restaurant staff. You may have seen their signs around town. You may have heard them, in the debates. They have been pushing this since the days that it was a bill at the legislature, when they created a fake grassroots organization to help get the bill passed. This is being pushed by the Arizona Restaurant Association. And unbelievably, they're calling it the Tipped Workers Protection Act. It's designed to be misleading, and we urge you to vote no. This is, they're playing with people's livelihoods. So no on 138, please. Okay, finally a good one. I'm sure just about everybody here who's watching this collected signatures for this one. I did. Prop 139 guarantees a fundamental right to receive abortion care until viability, around 24 weeks. After that point, there are exceptions if a healthcare provider finds it necessary to preserve the life, physical, or mental health of their patient. This protects us from extremists, both now and in the future. When we put this right in the state constitution, that means politicians cannot restrict abortion care without our approval, something that they have been doing for literally decades. And this reverses bad law, those bad laws that they've been passing for literally decades to restrict our rights. Right now, Arizona is under a 15-week ban. Abortion care beyond that for any reason other than to prevent a patient's death, or, and I'm going to quote from state statute here, the substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function, means a potential prison sentence for the doctor. It would send doctors to jail for up to 2 years. Many pregnancy complications are not detectable until 20 weeks after the point at which this ban kicks in. So this would force doctors to weigh the risks of prison time and losing their license against what they know to be best for their patient. And that is simply not acceptable. This would also improve health outcomes. Prop 139 would address, for example, the rise in infant deaths in Texas because women are being forced to carry to term pregnancies that are incompatible with life. Or maybe you've heard the stories of women on the brink of death because they need medical care that doctors aren't sure they're legally allowed to give. Prop 139 keeps politicians out of our private and personal healthcare decisions. A doctor should never have to wonder how close to death a woman has to be before they can provide care. And once Prop 139 passes, they won't have to. So we are urging you to vote yes on 139. All right, on to 140. You may be surprised by our recommendation here because CEBV supports the idea of reforming Arizona's current primary system, but Prop 140 is fatally flawed. So we are strongly urging a no vote. Prop 140 would open primaries to all voters, regardless of party affiliation. That's great. All candidates would appear on the same ballot in a single primary. That's fine too. And our state lawmakers would get to decide how many candidates go on that ballot. That is the point where they lost us. That's the fatal flaw. Politicians would get to decide how many candidates advance to the general election. For one-person offices like governor, our state lawmakers could choose to advance between 2 and 5 candidates to the general election by passing a bill that would determine how many candidates move forward, a bill that they could change every year if they wanted, every election cycle or every year. If the legislature fails to act, the decision advances to a single person, the Secretary of State. Suppose Mark Fincham were our Secretary of State. This issue shouldn't be up to the legislature. It shouldn't be up to a single politician. This opens the door to allowing nefarious people to make decisions about our ballots. These people can be incredibly creative in their deviousness. I have worked with them for 8 years, and I would never expect good intentions from them on the level that Prop 140 assumes. But Prop 140's main spokesman says, and I quote, he said this on the radio a couple of months ago, "We don't really care what they do," meaning lawmakers, "because anything is better than the current system. Prop 140 is not, in fact, better than the current system. It carries a host of unforeseen consequences, and we simply cannot support that. Again, this one does conflict with another measure, Prop 133. So if they both pass, whichever one gets the most votes will be enshrined into the state constitution, but we are recommending that neither pass. We are recommending a no vote on Prop 140. Okay, that is all of the constitutional amendments for November. That's certainly enough, I would argue. And so we are moving on to statutory changes. These would still be protected by the Voter Protection Act. They would be very, very difficult for the legislature to change. But you know, they do not go into the Constitution. Okay, Prop 311. This would tack a $20 fee onto every criminal conviction to benefit families of first responders who are killed in the line of duty. This sounds great in theory. These families are already very well taken care of by sources such as the federal government, state pension plans, individual agencies that provide life insurance to their members, and private entities like the 100 Club. They also get other very generous benefits, including tuition waivers, health insurance, funeral expenses, and other forms of one-time and ongoing assistance. This money would be on top of all of that. And you might say, that's fine, we can't put a price on supporting our first responders. However, the fact that the money comes from a surcharge added to the fines of people convicted of criminal offenses does give us pause. Most of these offenses are misdemeanors, and these people already pay plenty of fines and convictions, fines and penalties for their convictions. This would disproportionately affect the people in our society who have the least to give. It also boosts criminal penalties for assaulting a first responder. This means mandatory sentencing. And readers of the CEBV Weekly will note that CEBV has long opposed mandatory sentencing. It is inflexible by design, bypasses judicial discretion, and does not make us safer. It does, however, keep people in prison longer, which means we as taxpayers pay more prison costs and private prison companies make more money. It also disproportionately affects people of color. So I would argue that the time to help our first responders is while they are alive, not after they're dead. For example, a couple of years ago, Arizona passed a bill to give 911 dispatchers paid counseling after they assist with a traumatic event. Let's do more of that. That's a perfect example of what we should be doing. We should give these folks good wages, childcare assistance, tuition reimbursement, mental health support, not wait until after they die to support them, and not do it on the backs of minorities and the poor. So we are urging a no vote on Prop 311. Okay, Prop 312. This one would force cities and counties to give tax refunds to property owners if the county or city doesn't adequately enforce laws that criminalize common activities for the homeless. This might include things like illegal camping, obstructing public thoroughfares, loitering, or panhandling. Prop 312 was designed to penalize cities financially. It's not designed to fix homelessness or make encampments go away. And in fact, it doesn't do those things. There's no funding in this measure for job training programs or enforcement or shelter beds. What Prop 312 does do, all it does, is raise taxes. And here's why. If cities have to give some taxpayers refunds, that reduces the amount of tax revenue that's available. City services wouldn't change. So where does the funding for those necessary city services come from? Well, from the rest of us, the people who don't get refunds. And the crazy part about all of this is it's a moot point. The whole rationale is a 2019 Supreme Court decision, or a Ninth Circuit Court decision, that said that it was unconstitutional to criminalize sleeping on the street if people didn't have anywhere to go. That means for the past 5 years, cities haven't been able to address things like urban camping. However, and you may have seen this on the news, the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court recently overturned that ruling. That destroys the entire rationale behind Prop 312. Cities like Phoenix can now legally enforce laws they already had on the books, like bans on urban camping, that this court decision enjoined them from doing. So why exactly do we need this measure? Well, Prop 312 was written by the Goldwater Institute, which has a long history of opposing taxes. I believe that the bottom line here is an opposition to taxes and not a desire to address homelessness. So we are recommending that you vote no on Prop 312. It is simply not needed. It's a bad solution to a problem that's already been addressed. Please vote no. Moving on to the QAnon portion of our program. This is Prop 313. This would require anyone who's convicted of sex trafficking minors to serve a life sentence with no chance of ever being released. Prop 313 was inspired by a film with ties to QAnon conspiracy theories. The film profiled a man who claimed he saved children from trafficking, who was later sued for sexual misconduct himself. So you might be asking why we oppose a bill that's supposed to attack child sex trafficking. There are two main reasons. First, it's unnecessary. Under our current law, courts can already impose very harsh sentences for sex trafficking. A single conviction carries a 20-year sentences. And if prosecutors bring multiple charges, judges can stack those so that they have to be served consecutively, which creates what is essentially a life sentence. Second, it's not just unnecessary, it's sloppy. The bill has sloppy language, and that makes it actually harmful. Everyone here has probably seen a documentary or a crime drama where police ask a victim to help them catch the bad guy by acting as a decoy to help them get incriminating evidence. That really happens, and Prop 313 doesn't leave room for it. Instead, sex trafficking victims themselves could get wrapped up in that mandatory life sentence. And again, judicial discretion, which we talked about before. But this issue of wrapping up sex trafficking victims was pointed out when the bill was being discussed at the legislature, and the lawmakers behind the measure didn't do a thing. I guess when something is based on a QAnon conspiracy theory, rational thought flies out the window. Anyway, we strongly urge a no vote on Prop 313. All right, Prop 314. You may have heard this one called Show Me Your Papers on Steroids, or maybe SB 1070 2.0. Prop 314 does a lot of different things. It makes a state crime to cross a federal border without documentation. It gives local police immunity to arrest anyone they even suspect crossed the border illegally. This enables racial profiling without consequences. It also makes it a felony to use false documentation to apply for employment or public benefits. And it makes it a felony to knowingly sell fentanyl that leads to the death of another person. That's a lot of different subjects. What it doesn't do, and what it purports to do, but what it doesn't do, is fix immigration or the border. There are no parameters for how these arrests would happen. There's no requirement that officers actually witness a border crossing. It doesn't add new border patrol agents or immigration judges. It doesn't address the asylum system, and it's expensive. Enforcement could cost Arizona taxpayers, you and me, at least $325 million every year, and the measure contains no funding for any of it. Remember, Arizona is cutting programs right now due to a deficit, and law enforcement is already financially strained. For example, our state lawmakers are massively underfunding DPS. Staffing is so low that in 13 of Arizona's 15 counties, we don't have any DPS officers patrolling the roads after sundown. This measure would make that problem worse. And county attorneys know this. The people who are responsible for prosecuting public offenses and defending our government in court strongly oppose Prop 314. One attorney said the quote, criminal provisions are unenforceable, bad public policy, and embarrassing for this state. Those are strong words. But even the supporters of Prop 314 are pointing out problems with it, like Yavapai County Sheriff David Rhodes. He went down to the legislature to lobby them to support the measure, but he also said that if it passed, he would be back down there to get the funding required to enforce it. And remember, right now, the state is cutting things, not extending new funding for things. So where is the money going to come from? The business community opposes it too. Greater Phoenix leadership, the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, even the right-leaning Arizona Chamber of Commerce, they warn Arizona businesses will pay the price. So we urge you to not fall victim to the high-toned rhetoric that's out there, to look at what this measure actually does and does not do, and please vote no on Prop 314. Okay, we are on to our last proposition. Congrats for making it with me this far. Prop 315 is a little arcane. It's actually the most arcane of the ones that I'm discussing here, so bear with me. Hopefully you've heard about the recent US Supreme Court action that throws out the Chevron decision, and that lets judges overrule and undercut federal regulators. So it's very concerning from a regulatory standpoint. Prop 315 is sort of like that, but on the state level. This measure would block our state agencies from creating rules that cost us more than what is actually a very small amount in the government world, $500,000 over 5 years. Instead of rules, our state lawmakers want us to require them to pass the proposed rule into law instead. The issue here is that rulemaking is necessary. And I say this as a policy person. Rules bridge the gaps between what a law envisions, statute, and how it's carried out, the implementation of statute. And there are always gaps. There are always gaps. Rulemaking is critical for protecting us against everything from pollution and contaminated food to workplace hazards and rising drug prices. It can also help regulate spending. For example, our unaccountable and wasteful ESA voucher program. New rules could bring that program more in line with the stringent controls on spending at public schools. But if we pass 315, that means we're passing laws instead of going through the agency rulemaking process. And readers of the CEBV Weekly will know that it takes sometimes years for an idea to get through our legislature and become law. Years. That means lengthy delays for updating regulations, and that's going to hurt people. For example, you may have read in the news about senior living facilities and their alarming levels of elder abuse, neglect, and inadequate care. Prop 315 hamstrings the regulatory development that's critical to care standards in assisted living and nursing homes. That is going to hurt vulnerable Arizonans. That's the tip of the iceberg. There are too many other implications to count. But Prop 315 would harm our government's ability to function. It would harm public safety, and it hurts the rule of law. It's a recipe for chaos. So we strongly urge a no vote on Prop 315. So 100 and 300 level propositions. Our only yes recommendation is Prop 139, the Arizona Abortion Access Act, and all the others we are encouraging a no vote. Now, there are also county propositions. What about those? That will be anything where the number begins with a 4. So for example, a transportation tax renewal, county expenditure limit waiver, those sorts of smaller issues, local bonds and overrides. We are encouraging yes votes on all of those. If you would like more information on county propositions, you can see our Substack at cebv.substack.com. We also get asked quite often about school boards. So any candidate that has been endorsed by Save Our Schools Arizona on the school board level is definitely worth an enthusiastic vote. And you can find their recommendations over at sosarizona.org /vote for the number 4 public ed. So these are great candidates who will actually support our public schools. So the amount that we can move the needle with these votes cannot be overstated. Last election cycle, for example, you may have seen our ballot graphic that went around organically on social media and texted from friend to friend. We got hundreds of thousands of eyeballs, pairs of eyeballs on that graphic in Maricopa County alone. And we were able, as a result, to unseat 3 judges where Gavel Watch recommend a do not retain. And we came so close, within a hair's breadth, of removing a state Supreme Court justice. Now, if we reach just a few more voters, our impact can be even larger this election cycles, and outreach in other counties is critical to that work. We are giving these presentations daily. We're going to meetings all over the state. We'd love to do some other outreach like flyers, pump cards, and digital. That does take funding, and we are a grassroots organization. So if you find it in your hearts to throw us a few bucks, that would be very, very appreciated. And because we are a grassroots organization, we can promise you that every cent will go toward meeting those needs. And just a few more votes. We're so close to making massive change for our state, and we could really use your help doing that. Of course, that also means sharing the information. So we've got several ways for you to do that. We have CEBV.substack.com, where that's our guide to the propositions, either state propositions or county propositions. We have our Gavel Watch, which is that bit.ly in the middle. That's information on judges. And then our website up at the top. We have a newly revamped, redesigned website with all the information on it for 2024, or the QR code. So if you point your phone at this screen, it will pop up a web address that will lead you to all of our information, and take a photo of it and share it like crazy. So thank you very much for helping us get the word out, for being an informed voter, and for taking time today to be with us for this presentation. These are all the ways that you can follow us. Our email is probably the most consistent way. You can join our email list via our website at cebv.us. Please also subscribe to our Substack and follow us on social media. Thanks so much for being with us today. Go forth and vote.